Well, well. Didn't think anyone was left. You must be pretty tough. Huh.
Who the fuck are you?
Okay, so today we're looking at the fourth and the final Lord of Resident Evil Village, Heisenberg. Probably my favourite character in the entire game, and the best Lord, in my opinion, in the game. What differs him from everyone else, well, all the other Lords at least, is that he is the most powerful of them all, as well as the most compatible with the Parasite, and on top of that, he has completely different motives to the rest of them. So again, as always, we'll be going over the backstory of him, the lore, what you know in game, what you may not know from what the game tells you, and a few little extra bits of information. So without any further ado, let's jump into it. Okay, let's start at the beginning. So, Heisenberg was originally kidnapped by Miranda, and again, experimented on with the Cadeau. Again, we'll go over the fact that Miranda's plan was to find someone who could completely control and bond with the Cadeau parasite enough to be able to bring back her daughter who had passed, who was originally attempted to be brought back by the connections through Evelyn, but that went horribly wrong. Now she's trying to do it herself. Straight out of the gate, Heisenberg was the most suitable for the Cadeau parasite. Miranda was very impressed with his compatibility for it, and it all went well. It went well with him, but she decided not to use him as the vessel. Reasons why that is, no one's really 100% sure, but there's a lot of theories going around that maybe he was too powerful, and we'll get to his powers later on because he is quite strong. And the fact that, you know, her daughter probably would want to inhabit a female body rather than a man. So, you know, it would make sense on a kind of physical standpoint as well. But either way, she decided to keep him close and have him, again, be one of the four lords of the village. So, that is basically where he came from. Now let's talk about him as a character. So like I mentioned, Heisenberg is very, very different from the rest. He does not want to follow Miranda at all. He does not like her. And basically his entire motive is to overthrow her and kill her for everything that she's done to him. As we all know by now, Heisenberg's factory is just outside of the village, and there he has been doing some pretty interesting experiments. So in secret, he has been shutting himself away in his factory and rarely left it before the events of the game, building an army of what are called soldats in the game. And what these essentially are corpses. There's a lot of backstory and lore through concept arts that shows him going to the cemeteries in the village, or kind of where the dead may kind of linger in the village, and taking them back to his factory to experiment on them. What he would do then is kind of merge their bodies with metal and the parasite that he had access to bring them back to life, basically reanimate them as these kind of super soldiers essentially. And that's the grim part, like all of the soldiers you fight in his factory are corpses being kept alive by the parasite and pieces of metal. It's pretty grim. So yeah, his main plan is to kind of build this army in secret and then use it to kind of beat Miranda and kill her. He holds a massive grudge against her because she doesn't really consider them her children, like she says in the game quite regularly. She rather considers them failed experiments, but she doesn't want to lose, like, she doesn't want to lose them basically, like she doesn't want them to kind of leave. It's her life's work after all, she wants them to stay there. And she does kind of give them some false meaning, because at the end of the day, she doesn't consider them anything else other than experiments that didn't work, and he's aware of that, and, you know, that's not something he wants to kind of be known for, so he wants her dead, basically. On top of that, he doesn't have a massively friendly relationship with the rest of the lords of the village. He does not like them. There's a particular scene, which you're seeing in the background just now, where he argues with Dimitrescu. It's quite funny, but he does not get on with them. He really does think they are just puppets for Miranda, and, you know, he doesn't agree with that. He thinks it's completely wrong, and, you know, he doesn't want to be a part of it. So, of course he doesn't like those people, because they do want to follow her, and that's not what he's about at all. Moving on, we'll go to one of his more well-known experiments, shall we? And the footage was in the video briefly earlier, but this is the Sturm machine. For a little bit of context on what that is, it's the big propeller boss fight in the last half of the factory. Now, Heisenberg did consider the Sturm to be a complete failure because of its inability to control its, like, plane engines. It went so far as to it cutting its own arms off accidentally. It's not actually done on purpose, it's genuinely just done that on accident. But he doesn't want to scrap it, so he keeps it in his factory with the hope of maybe kind of improving it over time, but eventually Ethan arrives and it does set it loose on you, and it's quite the menace. First time around, it took me a while to get it down. It's tough, it's fast, it's deadly, and it looks pretty badass. So now let's move on to his powers and get to know what happened to him when he did bond with the parasite. First of all, he's a brilliant engineer, like he's a smart dude. I think that's pretty obvious from the fact of going through his factory, kind of finding all these corpse army soldiers he's made, and you know, he knows what he's doing, obviously, and that does play into his powers quite well. That's not really a power, it's just his general kind of knowledge is pretty high. He's not an idiot, like he knows what he's doing. But yeah, aside from his kind of default regenerative abilities that the code just grant people, he has the ability to control metal. He basically has magnetic fields in his body through his organs, and that allows him to kind of merge with metal, control metal. Obviously you see it a lot throughout the game. You know, he makes a staircase for himself. He can kind of summon his weapon from really far away just by holding his hand out, kind of like Thor, you know. Obviously it's a bit of a different thing, but that's essentially the gist. And it is very Magneto, you know, from the X-Men. Like, it's very similar to that, so that's the best way to describe it. And of course his big massive power, you know, the boss fight of the arena, he can kind of merge his body parts and organs and his general mass with huge amounts of metal to turn himself into this massive machine. Again, I'm not 100% sure if that can be reversed. I'd imagine it can be, but, you know, considering he did it at will, but, you know, we do kill him at that point. So I'm not 100% sure if it's reversible or not, but it's still a pretty spectacular power, and it is quite a big deal in that boss fight. So now we'll jump in briefly to some concepts for the character, and kind of ideas that almost were a thing, but eventually were scrapped, and there's a few interesting ones to kind of point out. First and foremost, he was originally not just going to be the only one of his family there. His brother was going to be there, and they would have been twins. It's unsure if his brother would have had the same powers or not. I believe, from looking at it, it does seem to be the case that they both share the power, so there would have been two of them, basically. On top of that, his father was meant to be in it, and he was actually going to be the leader of the village, but they scrapped that completely. And his mother was going to be in it too, but she was kind of bedridden. If you've seen the art, you'll know that she's kind of got this massive growth in her head, and she's strapped up to machines. It's pretty grotesque, but yeah, that was scrapped as well. So it did end up being just him. But it would have been interesting to see, like, you know, other family members of his. I'd imagine they'd all be kind of the same person, you know, personality-wise. So it would have been interesting to have more of that, but I'm more than happy with what we've got. So his overall kind of theme and his area's theme, obviously I mentioned this in the last video, each lord has like a kind of a horror theme around them. Dimitrescu being like the old school gothic horror, Donna being more psychological, Moreau being more body horror, like, you know, The Thing and stuff like that. Heisenberg is probably more the Frankenstein's monster-esque type thing. You know, the fact that he's making kind of these abominations out of corpses and stuff like that, it's very reminiscent to that kind of thing. And what's funny is the physical kind of design of his character, if you look through like concept arts and stuff like that, it is inspired by Frankenstein as well. So you can definitely see the resemblance of his whole area as well as his character as well and his motives. So that's a pretty cool, nice touch, I think, to his character as well. I like how each of the lords, even on a personality standpoint, is very different and, you know, very inspired by things in the kind of horror genre as a whole thing. One extra little thing I want to add to this video is something I find really funny in this game, and it is a reference to a pretty stupid moment in Resident Evil 5. You already know what I'm talking about at this point, probably, but during the boss fight of Heisenberg, Chris destroys his factory, and he turns around and just calls Chris a boulder-punching asshole, and that just really got me the first time around. If you don't know, in Resident Evil 5, in the final boss fight, you're in a volcano, which is already crazy enough, and there's a huge boulder in the way, and Chris literally punches it out of the way. There's honestly a handful of things in RE5 that are genuinely memed on nowadays, but having them actually reference that scene in a game was just hilarious to me. I was laughing for a good 10 minutes straight after I heard that line. But yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there because if people didn't understand the reference, that's where it's from. But overall, that's going to do it with Heisenberg. Very interesting character, very dynamic compared to the other ones, the other lords in the game. Now There's a lot more going on with him, there's a lot more personal reasons behind what he's doing, and I would personally love to see him come back as DLC. There is a huge kind of fan want from him in terms of something that happens in the game. When you first meet him in his factory, there is a kind of a question of him asking Ethan to help him, and a lot of people do want to see what would have happened if that had have been the case, and if Ethan did work with him. Obviously he didn't in the game, but there's always a lot of discussion on what if he did. That would be a pretty interesting way to take the DLC, just have like a what if scenario type thing. But yeah, I would love to see him return in DLC in some fashion, because I really like the character. But there you go, let me know what you think of the character, let me know what you think of his story, his kind of whole, you know, motive throughout the game. Do you want to see him return in DLC? Do you not? I'm always interested to know. But yeah, we'll go over to the Duke tomorrow, that's a very interesting one. And then it will be Miranda, and then we'll be moving on to other things. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you all tomorrow.
This can't be the end for me!